Given the Al-Shabaab attacks on the Westgate Mall and Garissa University, I'm sure your Secret Service could have suggested other countries for you to visit, but you wanted to go to Kenya.
Well, I think it is important, first of all, that the President of the United States underscores our commitment to partnering with countries around the world and that we're not intimidated by terrorist organizations. Second, the counterterrorism cooperation between the United States and Kenya and Uganda and other countries in East Africa is very strong. And part of the subject of the visit is to continue to strengthen those ties to make them more effective. Third, as I wind down my presidency, I've already had a number of visits to Africa, but this gives me an opportunity to focus on a region that I have not been visiting as president, and I'm also going to have the opportunity to talk to the African Union, so I'll be the first U.S. president to not only visit Kenya and Ethiopia, but also to address the continent as a whole, building off the African summit that we did here, which was historic and has, I think, deepened the kinds of already strong relationships that we have across the continent.
And you're going to talk about entrepreneurship at the summit in Nairobi. Mm-hmm. Is there any link between security and entrepreneurship?
I think there is. I believe that when people see opportunity, when they have a sense of control of their own destiny, then they're less vulnerable to the propaganda and twisted ideologies that have been attracting young people, particularly now being turbocharged through social media. And a while back, when we started looking at strategies to reach out to the Muslim world, to reach out to developed countries, a common theme emerged, which was people are not interested in just being patrons or being patronized and being given aid. They're interested in building capacity. The more we can encourage entrepreneurship, particularly for young people, the more they have hope. Now that requires some reforms in these governments that we continue to emphasize, rooting out corruption, increased transparency in how government operates, making sure that regulations are not designed just to advantage elites, but are allowing people who have a good idea to get out there and get things done.
And I suppose you famously said when you went to Africa, I think when you first became president, what we need is strong institutions and not strong men. You're going to Ethiopia, where there is effectively no opposition in parliament. Right. You're going to Kenya, where the International Criminal Court is still investigating certain members of the government, which seems kind of hardly ideal institutions.
Well, they're not ideal institutions, but what we found is that when we combine blunt talk with engagement, that gives us the best opportunity to influence and open up space for civil society and the human rights agenda that we think is so important. And a good example of this is Burma, where I was the first U.S. president to visit there at a time when we saw some possibility of transition. By the time I landed in Burma, it is not a liberal democracy by any means, and there were still significant human rights violations taking place. But my visit then solidified and validated the work of dissenters and human rights activists, and that has continued to allow them to move in the direction of democracy. So our view is, in the same way that I visit Russia, in the same way that I visit China, even when we know that there are significant human rights violations taking place, we want to make sure that we're there so that we can have this conversation and point in a better direction.
Well, haven't the Chinese got there first in Africa? You're going to go to the African Union building, which was built with Chinese money. You're going to travel along Chinese-built roads. You're going to go past endless Chinese traders on those roads.
Well, what is true is that China has, over the last several years, because of the surplus that they've accumulated in global trade and the fact that they're not accountable to their constituencies, have been able to funnel an awful lot of money into Africa, basically in exchange for raw materials that are being extracted from Africa. And what is certainly true is that the United States has to have a presence to promote the values that we care about. We welcome Chinese aid into Africa. We think that's a good thing. We don't want to discourage it. As I've said before, what I also want to make sure, though, is that that trade is benefiting the ordinary Kenyan and the ordinary Ethiopian and the ordinary Ghanaian, and not just a few elites and the Chinese who then get the resources that they need. And I think that we can help to shape an agenda where China, Europe, and the United States are all working together in order to address some of these issues.
I'm going to suggest there may be one other difficult issue when you're there, and that's the issue of homosexuality, gay marriage after the Supreme Court ruling. I mean, the Deputy President in Kenya, who you're going to meet, Mr. Ruto, he said, "We have heard that in the US they have allowed gay relations and other dirty things."
Yeah. Well, I disagree with him on that, don't I? And I've had this experience before when we visited Senegal in my last trip to Africa. I think that the president there, President Sall, is doing a wonderful job in moving the country forward, a strong Democrat. But in a press conference, I was very blunt about my belief that everybody deserves fair treatment, equal treatment in the eyes of the law and the state. And that includes gays, lesbians, transgender persons. I am not a fan of discrimination and bullying of anybody on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of sexual orientation or gender. And I think that this is actually part and parcel of the agenda that's also going to be front and center, and that is how are we treating women and girls. And as somebody who has family in Kenya and knows the history of how the country so often is held back because women and girls are not treated fairly, those same values apply when it comes to different sexual orientations.
Can we just move from difficult conversations that you're about to have in Kenya and the excruciatingly difficult conversations that you had in getting the Iran nuclear deal? I'm sure some people would say that, yes, you've set out the case why there is no pathway to a nuclear bomb now for Iran, but the net effect of lifting sanctions is that billions more will go to groups like Hezbollah, the Assad regime, and that is going to destabilize the region even more.
Well, keep in mind, first of all, we've shut off the pathways for Iran getting a nuclear weapon, which was priority number one. Because if Iran obtained a nuclear weapon, then they could cause all those same problems that you just listed with the protection of a nuclear bomb, and creates much greater strategic challenges for the United States, for Israel, for our Gulf allies, for our European allies. Second, it is true that by definition, in a negotiation and a deal like this, Iran gets something out of it. The sanctions regime that we put in place with the help of the Brits, but also the Chinese and the Russians and others, meant that they had funds that were frozen. They get those funds back. A large portion of those funds are going to have to be used for them to rebuild their economy. That was the mandate that elected Rouhani, and the Supreme Leader is feeling pressure there. Does the IRGC or the Quds Force have more resources? Probably, as the economy in Iran improves. But the challenge that we've had when it comes to Hezbollah, for example, aiming rockets into Israel, is not a shortage of resources. Iran's shown itself to be willing, even in the midst of real hardship, to fund what they consider to be strategic priorities. The challenge is us making sure that we've got the interdiction capacity, the intelligence, that we are building a much stronger defense against some of these proxy wars and asymmetric efforts. And we've sent a clear message to the Iranians. We are settling the Iran deal, but we still have a big account that we're going to have to work. Hopefully some of it diplomatically, if necessary, some of it militarily.
And you've had an intense campaign to sell the argument, which you've set out with great confidence.
Yes.
Have you managed to change anyone's mind yet of the Gulf states or in Congress?
Well, in Congress, I'm confident that we're going to be able to make sure that the deal sticks. With respect to the Gulf states, we had the leaders up to Camp David, and I described for them our interest in making sure that they build their capacity to defend themselves and their territory, and to make sure that destabilizing activities that Iran may be engaging in are checked. But keep in mind, our Gulf partners, for example, their combined defense budget is 10 times Iran's defense budget.
But have they got the willingness to fight? In the
Well,
way
and that's the issue, and that's the challenge. So the point that I've made to them consistently is, you have a strong, reliable partner in the United States. But ultimately, how issues get resolved in the Middle East is going to depend on both strengthening military capacity, but also addressing the underlying social and political issues that may lead not only to Iran being able to stir up problems among Shia populations, but also addressing some of the issues that are leading to the enormous and significant threat that they face from ISIL.
Nowhere is facing greater instability, and you mentioned ISIL, than in Syria. It looks like the British may be about to start flying alongside America in launching airstrikes. Would you welcome that?
Let me first of all say that Prime Minister David Cameron's been an outstanding partner of ours on not just the anti-ISIL coalition, but on a whole host of security issues. And I want to congratulate his government for meeting the commitment of a 2% defense budget, because we don't have a more important partner than Great Britain. And for him to make that commitment when he has a budget agenda that is, confined, a budget envelope that is confined, is really significant. And it is important for British leadership, but it's important for U.S. stability. Now, with respect to Syria, we consult closely. Britain's one of the leading members of the 60-nation coalition that's addressing ISIL. In combination with the Turks and the Jordanians and others, what we are trying to do is not only shrink the environment in which ISIL can operate, but also to create an environment in which we stop the border flows of foreign fighters into Syria. We've made progress there. We need to make more, and that's where Great Britain's participation can help. But the second part of this is pushing Assad, the Russians, the Iranians into recognizing there's got to be a political transition before Syria pulls the entire region into what could be a even longer and more bloody conflict.
You talk about the 2% defence spending of Britain. Yeah. I'm right in thinking that there was quite a bit of pressure put on from here saying it would be very bad if you didn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't say pressure. I think I had an honest conversation with David that Great Britain has always been our best partner. I guess you could go back to 1812 and make it.
When we tried to burn this place down.
Right. But that's ancient history. In modern times, there's no country where we have closer affinity in terms of values, and on the international stage, a nation with greater capacity. And so I think David understands that part of the greatness of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom, is that it is willing, as we are, to project power beyond our immediate self-interest to make this a more orderly, safer world. And we're glad we have that partner.
And people have talked about strategic shrinkage, that Britain is no longer playing its place on the world stage in the way that it used to. There's going to be a referendum on whether we stay in the European Union or not. And David Miliband, the former Foreign Secretary, he said, it's almost like Britain would be resigning from the world and no US government would be impressed by that.
Well, obviously the whole debate that's been taking place about the European Union, the Eurozone, Greece, that's a complicated piece of business. I will say this, that having the United Kingdom in the European Union gives us much greater confidence about the strength of the transatlantic union, and is part of the cornerstone of institutions built after World War II that has made the world safer and more prosperous. And we want to make sure that the United Kingdom continues to have that influence because we believe that the values that we share are the right ones, not just for ourselves, but for Europe as a whole and the world as a whole.
Can we just talk about, because you mentioned a moment ago about that you're in the tail end of your presidency. After the midterm elections, I read every commentator saying, well, this administration is effectively over now. The president is a dead man walking, and nothing is going to happen until 2016. Except that you've kind of got this deal, you've Cuba diplomatic relations, healthcare reform embedded, major trade deal with Asia. It's not a question of journalists.
Climate change agenda with China.
Okay, so
you've got a pretty long list.
Okay, so it's not a question a journalist often asks, what's gone right?
You know, it's interesting that every president, every leader has strengths and weaknesses. One of my strengths is I have a pretty even temperament. I don't get too high when it's high, and I don't get too low when it's low. And what I found during the course of the presidency, and I suppose this is true in life, is that investments and work that you make back here sometimes take a little longer than the 24-hour news cycle to bear fruit. So some of this is just some serendipity and convergence of a lot of things that we had been working on for a very long time coming together. But some of it is, I also believe, a recognition that the kind of gridlock and obstruction that Congress and the Republicans in Congress too often have engaged in is something that we just can't afford at a time when the world is moving so fast and there's so many challenges. And a robust exertion of executive authority within the lawful constraints that we operate under is something that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about.
Let me just ask you this finally, because I'm sure you would like it to be written that President Obama turned "yes, we can" into
"yes, we did."
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
But is there an issue that there are going to be unfinished business, perhaps most notably on race and on guns, by the time you leave the White House?
There will be. Look, there was never a promise that race relations in America would be entirely resolved during my presidency or anybody's presidency. I mean, this has been a running thread and fault line in American life and American politics since its founding. And so some of the most recent concerns around policing and mass incarcerations are legitimate and deserve intense attention, and I feel that we are moving the ball forward on those issues. What I will say is that 8 years, after 8 years of my presidency, that children growing up during these 8 years will have a different view of race relations in this country and what's possible. Black children, white children, Latino children. America is becoming more diverse. It's becoming more tolerant as a consequence. There's more interactions between groups. There are going to be tensions that arise. But if you look at my daughter's generation, they have an attitude about race that's entirely different than even my generation. And that's all for the good. You mentioned the issue of guns. That is an area where, if you ask me where has been the one area where I feel that I've been most frustrated and most stymied, it is the fact that the United States of America is the one advanced nation on earth in which we do not have sufficient common sense gun safety laws, even in the face of repeated mass killings. And you know, if you look at the number of Americans killed since 9/11 by terrorism, it's less than 100. If you look at the number that have been killed by gun violence, it's in the tens of thousands. And for us not to be able to resolve that issue has been something that is distressing, but it is not something that I intend to stop working on in the remaining 18 months.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After the formal interview in the Roosevelt Room, the President and I then went into the Rose Garden, where we walked and we talked about Africa, what the continent is going through and what it means to him personally. I didn't ask in the interview, but going back to Kenya, I mean, emotional, or will it be kind of, will you be in the bubble?
I think this one will probably be more in the bubble. Somebody was asking me about this, and you know, my first trip to Kenya was when I was still a young man, 27, and really didn't know the story of my father, who I didn't know growing up. I'd met at that point my sister and brother. So that was a moment of extraordinary discovery. Went back when Michelle and I got engaged so that she could meet everybody, and then have gone back with our children. This one's more business, right? You don't have the time to travel. You don't have the time to mix it up. Of course, this is one of the challenges of being president. Is you visit these remarkable places and you see a lot of conference rooms and hotel rooms.
But your approval ratings out there are just sensational.
Can
you import them?
Well, actually, the truth is that they're pretty good generally.
Here at the moment.
Well, here they're not bad. I think that my global approval rating probably is a tad higher than my U.S. one, but obviously I've got a direct connection to Kenya. What's true generally about the continent of Africa, though, is that they have a great affinity for the things we care about. Our culture, the values of freedom and liberty, like many around the world, they admire it. They admire our entrepreneurship. They admire our system of government. I think that there have been times where the United States has ignored Africa or seen it only through the prism of the Cold War, or seen it as a problem and a charity case. What's been exciting during the course of my presidency is how more and more people are seeing it as an opportunity. You've got some of the fastest growing economies in the world in Africa. You have significant economic growth in places like Kenya and Ethiopia. Businesses today see an opportunity there that they might not have seen before. And when you talk to young Kenyans or Ethiopians or Africans generally, we do this Young African Leaders Forum, and in fact we'll be doing next week when I get back from the trip a town hall with them here. And they're much more interested in talking about building businesses and creating jobs, less interested in just the traditional straight aid relationship. And so everything we're trying to do in Africa is related to how do we build on that? How do we build capacity? How do we create an environment in which the United States and wealthier countries are still investing in health and still investing in agriculture and electrification and all these things. But in program design, the goal is to allow Africans to thrive and succeed as opposed to constantly looking outwards for progress.
Well, I hope your trip goes extremely well. We're really grateful for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us on this BBC News special. I'm John Sopel at the White House.